The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species gathered around the massive holographic display. At its center, a three-dimensional map of the Kepler sector rotated slowly, showing the devastation that had become all too familiar over the past 3 years. Entire star systems marked in ominous red, indicating complete communication blackouts. Trade routes severed like broken arteries. And at the heart of it all, a cluster of worlds that had once been home to thriving civilizations, now nothing more than ash and memory. Ambassador Zethkar of the Crystalline Confederation adjusted his translucent form, the light refracting through his silicon-based body, casting rainbow patterns on the polished floor. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of desperation that had become commonplace in these meetings. "The Drachmarie have struck again," he announced, his crystalline fingers dancing across the holographic interface. New red zones appeared on the map, 3 more star systems that had gone dark in the past week alone. The mining colonies of Tertius Prime, the research stations orbiting Kepler 442, and his voice cracked slightly, the entire population of New Christhaven. 2 billion souls, gone in a matter of hours. A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. The Vorthan representative, her 6 arms trembling slightly, clicked her mandibles in distress. "How many attempts have we made now? How many peace envoys have we sent?" The Galactic Council's chief archivist, an ancient being whose species had long since transcended physical form, manifested as a shimmering cloud of particles. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. 47 formal diplomatic missions have been dispatched to Drachmarie space over the past 36 months. 0 have returned. The offerings presented have included technological blueprints, rare minerals, cultural artifacts, territorial concessions, trade agreements, military alliances, scientific knowledge, artistic masterworks, and the pause stretched long, the surrender of entire colonies. "And their response?" asked General Thrax of the hegemony, though everyone in the room already knew the answer. "Complete annihilation of the envoy ships. No communication. No negotiation. No quarter given." The archivist's particle cloud dimmed. "The Drachmarie do not speak. They do not bargain. They simply destroy." Ambassador Zethkar manipulated the hologram again, zooming in on the border between known space and the expanding zone of Drachmarie control. The boundary line moved like a slow tide, engulfing everything in its path. Our xenobiologists believe they're not even truly dragons in the mythological sense, despite their appearance. There's something far worse, a species that has evolved beyond the need for resources, territory, or survival in any conventional sense. They destroy because destruction is their nature. It's as fundamental to them as breathing is to us. Dr. Yelandra, the Council's chief xenopsychologist, floated forward in her containment suit filled with the methane atmosphere her species required. "The few long-range scans we've managed to conduct suggest their ships aren't just weapons of war. They're living extensions of the creatures themselves. Bioengineered vessels that can regenerate damage, adapt to new threats, and grow larger with each victory. They're not conquering us. They're consuming us." The weight of that revelation settled over the chamber like a funeral shroud. Entire civilizations, reduced to fuel for an unstoppable force of nature. "There has to be something," insisted Councillor Vexhai of the Trade Federation, his 3 hearts beating rapidly with anxiety. "Some offering they would accept, some common ground we could find. Every species has wants, needs, desires. It's the foundation of all diplomacy." General Thrax's armored carapace clicked as he shifted position. "Perhaps what they want is exactly what they're taking, our complete extinction. In which case, this discussion is pointless. We should focus on military solutions." "Military solutions?" The archivist's laugh was like the sound of wind through broken glass. "The combined fleets of 17 species couldn't even scratch their advance guard. Their smallest vessels shrug off our most powerful weapons like raindrops. Their largest." It paused, accessing data files. Their largest ships are measured in kilometers, not meters. Living mountains of scales, teeth, and flame that move through space as easily as fish through water. Ambassador Zethkar called up tactical recordings from a few military engagements that have been documented. The holographic display filled with images of space battles that could barely be called battles at all. Massive draconic forms, their hide gleaming with an inner fire, tearing through battle fleets with casual ease. Weapons that should have been capable of cracking planets simply absorbed into their scales and redirected back at their attackers. Ships that tried to ram them simply bouncing off like insects hitting a windshield. The hegemony's third fleet engaged a single Drachmarie vessel 3 months ago, General Thrax reported, his voice heavy with the memory. 1,000 ships, our finest warriors, equipped with quantum disruptors and antimatter torpedoes. The creature didn't even slow down. It simply ate them, absorbed the energy, the metal, the crew, everything. When it was finished, it was visibly larger than when the battle began. Dr. Yilandra brought up a new display, showing various diplomatic gifts that had been prepared for failed peace missions. We've tried everything our combined cultures could conceive. The Crystalline Confederation offered pure energy matrices that could power a star. The Vorthans presented their most sacred breeding grounds. The Federation proposed exclusive trading rights to entire sectors. The Empire offered blood, oaths of eternal servitude. Each mission was launched with hope, and each mission simply vanished. What about the humans? The question came from an unexpected source. Junior Attaché Killmoth of the Rim Territories, a young being whose species had only recently achieved interstellar flight. The question hung in the air, and several of the more experienced delegates exchanged glances. Umans. Counselor Vexhi's translator struggled with the unfamiliar term. I'm not familiar with this species. They're new, explained Ambassador Zethkar, calling up a file that seemed notably thin compared to the extensive dossiers maintained on other Galactic Council members. A bipedal species from a small world called Earth in the Sol system. They achieved faster-than-light travel only recently and have been observing our council sessions as probationary members. Their technology is primitive, their civilization young. They have no military to speak of that could threaten even our smallest vessels, let alone the Drachmarie. The hologram displayed images of human cities, human art, human faces with their strangely expressive features, and their unusual emotional range. Compared to the advanced civilizations represented in the chamber, they seemed almost quaint. But they're known for their creativity, added Dr. Yilandra thoughtfully. Our initial cultural exchanges revealed some fascinating aspects of their psychology. They have an unusual relationship with conflict, both incredibly violent and surprisingly peaceful, often simultaneously. And their approach to problem-solving is notably nonlinear. General Thrax scoffed, his mandibles clicking dismissively. What could a species that hasn't even left its home star system possibly offer to creatures that destroy entire galactic civilizations for sport? Perhaps, said the archivist slowly, that's exactly why we should ask them. The suggestion was met with a long silence. Finally, Counselor Vexhi spoke up. The humans have submitted several requests to participate in Drachmarie diplomatic missions. We've denied them each time, naturally, given their inexperience. And our assumption that sending them would be tantamount to murder, added Ambassador Zethkar. The Drachmarie have shown no mercy to advanced species with powerful militaries and ancient wisdom. What chance would humans have? Junior Attaché Killmoth cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps that's the point. Every offering we've made has been valuable, important, powerful. Maybe we've been approaching this wrong. Maybe the Drachmarie destroy our offerings precisely because they're valuable to us. The chamber fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. You're suggesting, Dr. Yilandra said slowly, that the Drachmarie reject our peace offerings not in spite of their value, but because of it? Think about it, Killmoth continued, gaining confidence as he spoke. Every species that has tried to make peace has offered their most precious possessions, their greatest achievements, their most sacred treasures. And every single offering has been destroyed. What if destruction isn't their response to our gifts? What if it's the point of them? Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form flickered with agitation. That would mean they're not just rejecting diplomacy, they're actively punishing us for attempting it. The archivist's particle cloud swirled more rapidly. A species that has evolved beyond material needs might indeed find the greatest insult to be the assumption that they could be bought, bargained with, or placated through gifts. Each offering we've made has been an attempt to impose our values, our understanding of desire and need upon them. So what do you propose? General Thrax demanded. That we send them something worthless? That we insult them with garbage? Maybe, said Kilmoth quietly, we send them something that isn't an offering at all. Before anyone could respond, alarm klaxons began blaring throughout the chamber. The holographic display automatically switched to incoming emergency transmissions, and the face of a panic communications officer appeared in the air above them. Council emergency. Drachmary forces have been detected at the edge of the Centauri system. 12 Dreadnought-class vessels, heading directly for the core worlds. Estimated time to impact, 72 hours. The chamber erupted in chaos. Voices shouted over each other in a dozen languages, some calling for immediate evacuation, others demanding a final military stand, still others simply crying out in despair. The Centauri system wasn't just another collection of colonies. It was home to the Council's central archives, the cultural treasures of 100 species, and over 50 billion souls. Through the chaos, Ambassador Zethkar's voice cut like a knife. Emergency session. We need every available ship, every possible weapon, every last desperate strategy we can conceive, including, added Dr. Yelandra quietly, the humans. As if summoned by her words, a new transmission appeared on the display. The face that appeared was distinctly human, bipedal, mammalian, with unusual fur growing only from the top of its head and strange, mobile features that seemed to shift with emotion. The being spoke in the clear, precise tones of someone who had been practicing their presentation for a very long time. Honored Council, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Endeavor. We've been monitoring the situation and formally request permission to attempt diplomatic contact with the Drachmary forces. We understand the risks and the pessimistic probabilities of success. However, we believe we may have something to offer that hasn't been tried before. General Thrax barked a laugh that held no humor. Impossible. What could you possibly have that we haven't already offered? Captain Chin's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes, those strange, binocular eyes that somehow conveyed emotion through their movements, shifted slightly. With respect, General, you've offered them your best. We'd like to offer them our worst. The statement was so unexpected, so seemingly backwards, that the chamber fell silent again. Into that silence, Captain Chun continued. We've studied the records of every failed diplomatic mission, every precious gift, every sacred offering, every demonstration of power and value that has been rejected and destroyed. And we've noticed something that perhaps only humans would notice, because it's so fundamentally human. Which is, prompted Dr. Yelandra. You've been trying to impress them. Every single one of your offerings was designed to show respect, to demonstrate your civilization's greatest achievements, to prove your worth as a species. But what if, Captain Chin paused, what if the Drachmary don't want to be impressed? What if they want to be ordinary? The word hung in the air like a foreign concept. Ordinary. In a galaxy where every species had spent millennia perfecting their greatest arts, their most sophisticated technologies, their most profound philosophies, the idea of deliberately offering something ordinary was almost incomprehensible. You want to insult them, General Thrax said flatly. No, Captain Chin replied. We want to be honest with them. Every gift you've offered has been a performance, a presentation, an attempt to prove something. We want to simply be ourselves, completely, authentically, unremarkably ourselves. Ambassador Zethkar leaned forward, his crystalline form catching the light in new patterns. And what exactly would that entail? Captain Chun smiled. Another one of those uniquely human expressions that somehow conveyed warmth despite its asymmetry. Well, we were thinking of starting with lunch. The response was immediate and cacophonous. Voices exploded across the chamber in outrage, disbelief, and what could only be described as existential confusion. Lunch? They were facing the extinction of 50 billion souls, and the humans wanted to serve lunch? But beneath the chaos, a few voices remained thoughtful. Dr. Yilandra found herself considering the psychology of creatures that had rejected every conceivable offering of value. The archivist accessed files on human culture, noting patterns of behavior that seemed to prioritize social bonding over material exchange. And in the back of his mind, Junior Attaché Killmoth remembered something he had read about human history, how some of their greatest diplomatic breakthroughs had happened not in formal negotiations, but around shared meals. As the shouting continued, Captain Chun waited patiently, her hands folded in front of her. When the noise finally died down, she spoke again. I know how it sounds. Believe me, the absurdity isn't lost on us. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone isn't your best. It's your truth. And the truth is, humans are remarkable only in how unremarkable we are. We don't have crystal bodies that refract light, or 6 arms that can multitask, or the ability to transcend physical form. We're just people. And sometimes being just people is exactly what someone needs. The transmission cut out, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Outside the viewports, stars twinkled peacefully, unaware that 12 living mountains of scales and fire were bearing down on one of the galaxy's most precious systems. 71 hours and counting. Ambassador Zethkar looked around the chamber at the faces of beings whose civilizations represented millions of years of evolution, advancement, and achievement. Then he thought about a small blue world where bipedal creatures had somehow convinced themselves that sharing a meal could change the universe. All in favor of authorizing human diplomatic contact? He asked quietly. The vote wasn't even close. The Earth vessel Endeavor was unremarkable in almost every conceivable way. Where other ships in the hastily assembled diplomatic fleet boasted sleek lines that spoke of advanced engineering, the Endeavor looked like it had been assembled from spare parts in someone's garage. Its hull bore scorch marks from atmospheric reentry, scratches from asteroid encounters, and what appeared to be amateur welding repairs. Most embarrassing of all, someone had painted "Wash Me" in the dust covering one of its cargo bay doors. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge, watching the massive Drachmarie vessels through the main view screen. Even at this distance, their sheer presence was overwhelming. The smallest of the 12 ships was larger than anything humanity had ever built, its living hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift and flow like breathing. The largest was simply incomprehensible, a creature ship so vast that its wings could have wrapped around Earth's moon. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station, "the Galactic Council is hailing us." Again, Sarah sighed and gestured for him to put it through. The view screen split to show the anxious face of Ambassador Zethkar, his crystalline features refracting light in agitated patterns. "Captain Chun, I must once again urge you to reconsider this course of action. The Drachmarie have been completely silent since entering the system. Our scans indicate they're simply waiting. This could be your last chance to withdraw. Respectfully, Ambassador, they're not waiting for us to leave. They're waiting for us to do something predictable." Sarah adjusted her uniform, standard Earth Fleet issue, complete with coffee stains and a patch that read, "I break for space whales," that she'd somehow never gotten around to removing. How long until they reached Centauri Prime? 37 hours at current speed, replied Dr. Yilandra, her voice tight with stress. "Captain, what exactly are you planning? The Council had a right to know what this lunch will entail." Sarah smiled, and For a moment, her expression held something that might have been either confidence or complete insanity. "Doctor, have you ever heard of instant noodles?" The question was met with confused silence. Finally, General Thrax's voice crackled through the calm. "Is this some sort of human weapon?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied. "It's more like the opposite of a weapon." "Rodriguez, show them the cargo manifest." The lieutenant's fingers danced across his console, and a simple list appeared on the split screen. The Galactic Council representatives stared at it for a long moment, clearly trying to process what they were seeing. Freeze-dried noodles, Red Ambassador Zeth Carr slowly. Flavor packets, disposable containers, plastic utensils, portable heating units, and, he paused, 3,000 units of something called Cup O Noodles, chicken flavor. "That's our diplomatic offering," Sarah confirmed cheerfully. "The single most unremarkable food in human history. Invented by accident, mass-produced for convenience, and generally considered the food of college students and people who've given up on life. It's bland, it's processed, it's artificial, and it takes 3 minutes to prepare. By any measure of culinary achievement, it's absolutely terrible." The silence that greeted this announcement was profound. "You're going to serve the most powerful force in the galaxy. Bad food." Dr. Yelander's voice climbed several octaves. "On purpose. We're going to share a meal with them," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. See, every culture in the Council has offered the Drachmarie your greatest treasures, your most advanced technologies, your most sacred artifacts. You tried to impress them with your best. But nobody's ever tried to include them in your worst." She turned back to the view screen showing the Drachmarie fleet. "Look at them. They're not attacking. They're not advancing. They're not even threatening us. They're just there, waiting. What if they're not waiting for another offering to destroy? What if they're waiting for someone to finally treat them like equals instead of gods?" Lieutenant Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission from the lead Drachmarie vessel." Sarah felt her heart skip. No Drachmarie ship had ever initiated contact before. "Put it through." The view screen filled with static, then slowly resolved into an image that defied description. The creature that appeared was simultaneously majestic and terrifying, scales that seemed to contain entire nebulae, eyes like binary stars, and a presence that felt ancient beyond measure. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of solar wind through cosmic dust. "Small vessel, you approach without tribute. You carry no weapons of worth. Your ship bears the marks of mundane use. Why do you come?" Sarah took a deep breath. Every instinct told her to stand straighter, to speak formally, to treat this encounter with the gravity it deserved. Instead, she deliberately relaxed her posture and spoke in the same tone she might use to greet a neighbor. "Hi there. I'm Sarah Chun, captain of the Endeavor. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by to see if you folks might be hungry. We've got some food we'd be happy to share." The pause that followed was so long that Rodriguez quietly checked to make sure the transmission was still active. Finally, the Drachmarie spoke again, and there was something different in its tone, not softer exactly, but curious. "Food. You offer sustenance." "Well, that's probably being generous," Sarah admitted with a laugh. "It's instant noodles, so calling it sustenance might be stretching things. But it's hot, it's filling, and it's surprisingly addictive once you get used to it. Would you like to try some?" Another pause, this one even longer than the first. In the background of the Drachmarie transmission, Sarah could hear sounds that might have been communication between multiple creatures, deep rumblings, and resonant tones that felt like conversation. "Aston, noodles." The creature's pronunciation of the words was careful, as if testing their weight. "This is your offering? Your tribute to prevent destruction." "Oh, this isn't a tribute," Sarah said quickly. "It's just lunch. No stringes attachées, no hidden agenda, no diplomatique games. Just some people sharing a meal. Though I should warn you, the chicken flavor is kind of artificial. We brought some vegetable varieties, too, if you prefer." The communication channel went silent for nearly 10 minutes. During that time, the Galactic Council's emergency frequency exploded with panic chatter. Voices demanded to know what was happening, whether the humans had somehow made things worse, whether they should prepare for immediate attack. Sarah ignored it all. Instead, she walked to the ship's small galley and began preparing instant noodles. Not just a few cups, but dozens of them. The process was exactly as mundane as she described. Tear open the packets. Add hot water. Wait 3 minutes. Stir. The smell of artificial chicken flavoring filled the bridge, causing several crew members to wrinkle their noses. When the transmission resumed, the Drakmary's image seemed somehow different. Less imposing, perhaps, or maybe just less distant. Captain Sarah Chun of the Endeavor. We have conferred among ourselves. Your proposal is unprecedented. None have offered to share their sustenance without seeking favor in return. Well, Sarah said, carefully balancing a styrofoam cup of steaming noodles, that's because none of them understand the fundamental rule of instant noodles. They're always better when you're sharing them with someone else. Even when they're terrible. You acknowledge that your offering is terrible. Oh, absolutely, Sarah laughed. This stuff is nutritionally questionable, artificially flavored, and probably contains preservatives that will keep it edible until the heat death of the universe. It's everything that's wrong with processed food. But you know what? Sometimes terrible is exactly what you need. Sometimes terrible is honest in a way that perfection never can be. She held up the cup to the camera. See, every other species that's approached you has tried to prove their worth through their achievements. They've shown you their art, their technology, their wisdom, their power. They put their best foot forward because they thought that's what you wanted to see. But maybe what you actually wanted was to see who they really are when they're not trying to impress anyone. The Drakmary's massive head tilted slightly. And who are humans when they are not trying to impress? Sarah considered the question seriously. Tired, mostly. A little confused. Definitely imperfect. We burn our food. We argue with each other. We make mistakes. We laugh at inappropriate times. And we eat processed noodles while standing in our kitchens at 2 in the morning wondering how we ended up here. She paused. But we also share what we have, even when what we have isn't much. Especially then, sharing is valued among your species. It's pretty much our defining characteristic, Sarah confirmed. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But we're really good at sitting down together and figuring things out over a meal. Even a terrible meal. The Drakmary was quiet for a moment. Then we would examine this instant noodles. Sarah felt her heart leap. Really? That's great. How would you like to do this? We could bring some over to your ship, or you could send someone to ours, or we could meet somewhere in between. We will come to you. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge of the Endeavor in stunned silence. Rodriguez was the first to speak. Ma'am, did a Drakmary just invite itself aboard our ship? I think it did, Sarah replied, her voice filled with wonder. Rodriguez, contact the council and let them know what's happening. Wilson, prepare the mess hall for visitors. And someone give me more instant noodles, a lot more. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the Endeavor's cramped mess hall, watching through the viewport as a Drakmary shuttle approached their ship. The word shuttle was inadequate. The craft was easily the size of a Galactic Council destroyer, its living hull pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns as the larger vessels. As it drew closer, Sarah could see that it wasn't just a vehicle, but a creature in its own right, its movements graceful and purposeful as it maneuvered into the Endeavor's cargo bay. Captain, called Chief Engineer Patel over the comm. I'm reading some seriously weird energy signatures from our guests. My instruments can't even classify half of what they're doing. Also, our artificial gravity just stabilized itself somehow. I think their presence is actually improving our ship's performance. Noted, Sarah replied, smoothing down her uniform and checking that the instant noodle station was properly set up. 3 hot water dispensers, stacks of styrofoam cups, and enough flavor packets to feed a small army. It was possibly the most ridiculous diplomatic setup in galactic history. The cargo bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and Sarah found herself face to face with beings that defied every expectation she'd ever had about first contact. The Drachmarie delegation consisted of 3 creatures, each fundamentally draconic, but as different from each other as humans were from dolphins. The first was massive even by Drachmarie standards, easily 4 meters tall, with scales that shifted color like oil on water and wings that had been carefully folded to fit through the ship's corridors. The second was smaller, but more densely armored, its hide looking like living metal inscribed with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The third was the most surprising of all, no larger than a human, with scales that seemed to be made of condensed starlight and eyes that held depths Sarah couldn't begin to fathom. "Welcome aboard the Endeavor," Sarah said, bowing slightly. "I'm Captain Shun. Thank you for accepting our invitation." The largest, Drachmarie, spoke, its voice filling the cargo bay like distant thunder. "I am designated Vorthak the Enduring. This is Zephyr who cuts the void, and Stella of the deep currents. We have come to understand your Noodles." Sarah grinned. "Well then, let's get cooking. Fair warning, this is going to be the most anticlimactic cultural exchange in history." She led them through the ship's corridors to the mess hall, pointing out various human technologies along the way. Not impressive ones. Sarah made sure to highlight the squeaky door hinge that engineering had been meaning to fix for 6 months, the water recycler that occasionally made concerning gurgling sounds, and the coffee maker that had achieved sentience but only used its intelligence to brew slightly better coffee. "These are the wonders of human engineering," she explained cheerfully. "We build things that work well enough, and then we live with their quirks because fixing them would require paperwork." Zephyr, who cuts the void, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species embraces imperfection." "Embraces might be too strong a word," Sarah admitted. "We tolerate it. We work around it. We make jokes about it. Sometimes we even learn to love it." She gestured to a dent in the wall beside her quarters. "I made that mark 3 years ago when I was carrying too much stuff and walked into the doorframe. I could have it fixed, but now it reminds me not to multitask while tired." It's become part of the ship's personality. In the mess hall, Sarah began the ritual of instant noodle preparation. She moved slowly, explaining each step not as if it were a sacred ceremony, but as if it were exactly what it was, a mundane task made slightly special by the act of sharing it. "First, you tear open the packet. Try not to spill the seasoning everywhere, though everyone does it at least once." She demonstrated, managing to scatter artificial chicken powder across the counter. "See? Part of the authentic experience." Stella of the deep currents leaned forward, studying the process with intense curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was like solar wind through crystal formations. "The preparation ritual is simple, almost insultingly simple," Sarah confirmed. "That's part of the point. When you're tired, when you're broke, when you just can't deal with anything complicated, instant noodles are there for you. They don't judge. They don't require skill. They just exist." She poured hot water over the noodles, and the familiar smell of artificial flavoring filled the air. The Drachmarie delegation observed the process with the intensity of scholars studying an ancient text. 3 minutes?" asked Vorthak the Enduring. 3 minutes, Sarah confirmed, setting a timer. "No more, no less." "Well, actually, some people like them a little al dente, so maybe 2.5 minutes. And some people forget about them, and they get mushy. But officially, it's 3 minutes." While they waited, Sarah pulled out 4 mismatched chairs, none of them particularly comfortable, all of them bearing the scars of daily use. "Please sit. Fair warning, the blue one wobbles, and the red one has a spring that pokes you if you lean back too far." The sight of 3 ancient, powerful beings carefully settling themselves onto cheap plastic furniture was perhaps the most surreal moment in diplomatic history. Vorthak's massive form made the chair creak ominously, while Stella perched delicately on the edge of her seat like a bird. "Your furniture is also imperfect," observed Zephyr. "Everything on the ship is imperfect," Sarah said cheerfully. "We're basically flying around the galaxy in a collection of things that work just well enough to keep us alive. It's not glamorous, but it's honest." The timer chimed, and Sarah distributed the prepared noodles. The Drachmarie stared at their cups with expressions that were hard to read. "So," Sarah said, settling into the wobbling blue chair, "this is it. This is the great human achievement I wanted to share with you. Terrible noodles in a plastic cup, eaten with a flimsy plastic fork, while sitting on uncomfortable furniture in a ship that's held together by determination and duct tape." She took a bite, making a face at the artificial flavor. "And you know what? It's awful. But it's our awful, and that makes it kind of wonderful." Vorthak carefully lifted a small portion of noodles with a plastic fork, which looked comically tiny in his massive claws. He examined it for a moment, then placed it in his mouth. His expression was unreadable as he chewed thoughtfully. "It is," he began, then paused, searching for words. "Unlike any sustenance we have experienced." "In a bad way?" Sarah asked, suddenly, worried that she'd just committed an intergalactic incident. "In an honest way," Stella replied, taking her own tentative bite. "There is no pretense here, no attempt to mask what it is. This food declares its nature openly." Zephyr had been eating steadily and was already halfway through his cup. "It is terrible," he announced, "and yet satisfying. How is this possible?" Sarah laughed, nearly choking on her own noodles. "That's the magic of instant noodles. They're terrible in the most comforting way possible. They don't pretend to be gourmet cuisine. They don't try to impress you. They just fill the space in your stomach and give you something warm to hold while you figure out what to do next." The four of them ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the slurping of noodles and the gentle hum of the ship's recycling systems. Finally, Stella spoke. "For 3 years, species after species has approached US with their finest achievements. Technologies that could reshape reality. Art that could move stars to tears. Wisdom accumulated over millennia." Her starlight scales dimmed slightly. "And each time, we have rejected their offerings. Because they were trying too hard?" Sarah guessed. "Because they were lying to US," Vorthak rumbled. "Not deliberately, but they showed US only their successes, their triumphs, their perfection. They presented themselves as flawless beings worthy of preservation." "But no one's flawless," Sarah said softly. "Precisely." Zephyr set down his empty cup. "We have existed for eons, Sarah Chun. We have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. And every one of them, in the end, has fallen to the same corruption, the belief that perfection is attainable, and that imperfection is something to be hidden." Stella leaned forward. "We do not destroy civilizations because we enjoy destruction. We destroy them because they have forgotten how to be real." The mess hall fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. Sarah found herself staring into her cup of instant noodles, seeing them suddenly, not as terrible food, but as a kind of truth. "You've been testing us," she said quietly. "All of you. For 3 years, you've been waiting for someone to show up and just be themselves. Not their best selves, not their most impressive selves, just themselves. And today," Vorthak said, his voice somehow gentler than it had been, "a small ship approached US bearing terrible food and honest company. And for the first time in centuries, we have been offered not a gift, but an invitation." Sarah looked up at the 3 ancient beings sitting around her table, eating instant noodles from styrofoam cups, and felt something shift in the universe. Not dramatically, just a small, quiet adjustment like a door opening that had been closed for a very long time. "So," she said, pushing her empty cup aside, "what happens now?" The Galactic Council emergency session had been in continuous operation for 18 hours. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form had developed stress fractures that refracted the chamber's lights into chaotic patterns, while General Thrax had worn a groove in the floor from his anxious pacing. The central holographic display showed the Drachmarie fleet maintaining position around the human vessel Endeavor, now with one of their shuttles docked to its cargo bay. Still no word from Captain Chun, reported Communications Director Veltar, her 6 arms manipulating multiple control interfaces simultaneously. The last transmission was her request for more hot water and Maybe some chopsticks, if anyone has them. Dr. Yelandra floated closer to the display, her methane-filled containment suit casting eerie shadows. The energy readings are unprecedented. Our sensors are detecting what can only be described as contentment emanating from the Drakmari vessels. I didn't even know contentment had an energy signature. Contentment? General Thrax's mandibles clicked in disbelief. From creatures that have spent 3 years incinerating everything in their path. The archivist's particle cloud swirled thoughtfully. The last verified Drakmari communication spoke of examining instant noodles. Our xenolinguistics team believes this may be the first time in recorded history that the Drakmari have used the word examine instead of destroy. Junior Attaché Killmoth, who had been quietly monitoring deep space transmissions, suddenly straightened. Honored Council, I'm receiving a broad-spectrum transmission from the Endeavor. Captain Shun is requesting to address the emergency session. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate present understood that this could be humanity's final message, a last testimony before their inevitable destruction. Ambassador Zethkar's voice cracked as he spoke. Put her through. The main display flickered, then resolved into an image that defied every expectation the Council had harbored about first contact with the Drakmari. Captain Shun appeared on screen, sitting at what appeared to be a small dining table in an unremarkable ship's mess hall. Arrayed around the table with her were 3 of the most terrifying creatures in known space, each holding what looked like a small plastic cup, and appearing to be engaged in casual conversation. Council, Captain Shun said cheerfully, I'd like you to meet my new friends. This is Vorthak, the Enduring, Zephyr who cuts the void, and Stella of the Deep Currents. They've been telling me about their perspective on galactic politics, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. The largest Drakmari, Vorthak, leaned into the camera's view. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the threatening undertones that had characterized previous Drakmari communications. Greetings, Galactic Council. We have shared instant noodles with Captain Shun and her crew. The experience has been illuminating. Ambassador Zethkar stared at the screen in complete bewilderment. Captain Shun, are you having dinner with them? Well, technically it's lunch, Sarah replied. Though I guess at this point it might be considered brunch. Tom gets weird when you're negotiating over sodium-packed noodles. She gestured to the empty cups scattered across the table. We've been talking for about 6 hours now, and I think we've figured out where the miscommunication has been happening. Dr. Yelandra leaned forward so quickly that her containment suit's stabilizers whined in protest. Miscommunication? Captain, are you saying this was all a misunderstanding? Stella of the Deep Current spoke, her voice like starlight made audible. Not a misunderstanding. A fundamental difference in perspective. For millennia, species have approached US seeking to prove their worth through achievement. But worth cannot be proven. IT can only be acknowledged. Zephyr, who cuts the void, set down his cup with deliberate care. Your council has operated under the assumption that we desired tribute, that we could be appeased through offerings of sufficient value. This assumption reveals a profound misunderstanding of our nature. Captain Shin picked up a plastic fork and began sketching diagrams on a napkin, an absurdly casual gesture given the circumstances. See, here's what I learned over lunch. The Drakmari aren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They're more like cosmic quality assurance inspectors. Quality assurance? General Thrax's voice rose to a near squeak. They've destroyed entire civilizations. Civilizations that had lost touch with their authentic selves, Sarah corrected gently. Vorthak, would you mind explaining your perspective? The massive Drakmari straightened, and suddenly, the mess hall seemed far too small to contain his presence. We are ancient, General Thrax. We have observed the patterns of galactic civilization for eons. Again and again, we have watched species achieve greatness, only to lose themselves in the pursuit of perfection. They begin with authenticity, added Stella. Cultures born from necessity, art born from struggle, wisdom born from failure. But success breeds complacency. Complacency breeds pretense. And pretense is the death of the soul. Zephyr leaned forward, his metallic scales reflecting the chamber's lights. When a civilization approaches US with their greatest treasures, they reveal that they have forgotten their greatest truths. They offer US what they think we want to see, rather than who they actually are. The council chamber had fallen completely silent. The implications of what the Drachmarie were saying slowly sank in, causing a collective shudder among the assembled delegates. Ambassador Zethkar found his voice first. You destroyed those civilizations because they were being dishonest? We destroyed them because they had already destroyed themselves, Vorthak replied sadly. When a species loses the ability to be genuine, to acknowledge their flaws alongside their strengths, they become hollow. Beautiful on the surface, empty beneath. We simply complete the process. Captain Chen held up her hands. Before anyone starts panicking, let me share the good news. The Drachmarie aren't interested in destroying anything right now. In fact, they're considering something they haven't done in over 1,000 years. Which is? Dr. Yelandra asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Stella's starlight scales brightened. We are considering the possibility of settlement, of choosing a region of space where we might simply exist, not as destroyers, but as neighbors. The silence that greeted this announcement was profound. Finally, General Thrax spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Neighbors? The thing is, Sarah explained, the Drachmarie are tired. They've been playing the role of cosmic cleaners for millions of years, and it's exhausting work. They'd much rather find a few species they can actually have a conversation with, species that don't feel the need to put on their best face every time they interact. Vorthak's massive head nodded slowly. Humanity showed US something we had not seen for eons, a willingness to be imperfect in the presence of power. Captain Chun offered US terrible food, acknowledged its terribleness, and invited US to share in that terribleness without shame. It was, added Zephyr, the most honest interaction we have experienced in millennia. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form flickered with rapid thoughts. Captain Chun, what exactly are you proposing? Sarah grinned and gestured around the modest mess hall. I'm proposing we stop trying to impress each other and start trying to understand each other. The Drachmarie have agreed to call off their advance on Centauri Prime. In exchange, they'd like to establish a cultural exchange program. A what? Cultural exchange, Sarah repeated cheerfully. They want to learn about the everyday aspects of galactic civilization, not our greatest achievements, our ordinary experiences, how we really live, not how we think we should live. Stella leaned into the camera's view. We wish to understand why humans choose to eat terrible food when better alternatives exist. We wish to know why you maintain broken equipment rather than replacing it. We wish to comprehend the value you place on imperfection. And, in return, Sarah continued, they're willing to share their own experiences. Turns out, even cosmic entities have bad days. Vorthak here has been telling me about the time he accidentally destroyed a planet while trying to adjust his ship's orbit. Apparently, spatial calculations get complicated when you're the size of a small moon. Vorthak's expression managed to convey embarrassment despite his alien features. Mathematics becomes imprecise when one is tired and irritable. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the council chamber. Here was perhaps the most powerful being in known space, casually discussing a mistake that had cost billions of lives, while eating processed noodles from plastic cup. Captain Shun, are you saying that the Drachmarie are willing to coexist with galactic civilization? More than that, Sarah replied. They're offering to help. See, their perspective on civilizational health is actually pretty valuable. They can spot the early warning signs of cultural decay long before it becomes terminal. Think of them as cosmic therapists. They help species work through their authenticity issues before those issues become catastrophic. Communications Director Veltar raised one of her 6 arms hesitantly. And if a species refuses this therapy? Zephyr's answer was matter-of-fact. Then, they continue on their chosen path. We do not force change upon unwilling populations. However, we also do not permit such civilizations to spread their dysfunction to others. It's like cosmic quarantine, Sarah explained. Species that insist on maintaining toxic patterns get isolated until they either work through their issues or, well, collapse under their own contradictions. The council chamber erupted in discussion as delegates began processing the implications of this new arrangement. The conversations were intense, but notably different from the panic that had characterized their earlier meetings. There was hope in the voices now, mixed with uncertainty and a healthy dose of confusion. Ambassador Zethkar called for order. Captain Shun, this proposal raises many questions. How would such an arrangement be structured? What guarantees would we have? What would be expected of participating civilizations? Sarah looked at her 3 dining companions, who seemed to be having their own rapid conversation in a series of harmonic tones that bypassed the universal translators entirely. Finally, Stella spoke. We propose a simple agreement. Species that wish to participate in galactic civilization must demonstrate their authenticity annually, not through grand gestures or impressive achievements, but through honest self-reflection. A cosmic audit of sincerity, Vorthak added. Each species would present not their successes, but their struggles. Not their wisdom, but their confusion. Not their triumphs, but their failures. Zephyr's tone carried a hint of amusement. Those who can acknowledge their flaws with honesty and humor will find U.S. willing allies. Those who insist on maintaining facades of perfection will find U.S. less accommodating. General Thrax spoke slowly, as if testing the words. You're asking us to voluntarily admit our weaknesses to the most powerful force in the galaxy? We're asking you to be real, Sarah said simply. The same way we were real today when we served you terrible noodles and admitted they were terrible. No pretense, no performance, no trying to be anything other than who we actually are. She stood up from the table, and the camera pulled back to show the full scene. 3 cosmic entities sitting around a small table covered in empty instant noodle containers, plastic utensils, and napkins with sketch diagrams. It was possibly the most mundane setting for a paradigm-shifting diplomatic breakthrough in history. The Drachmarie have offered humanity a permanent seat at this new galactic table, Sarah announced. Not because we're impressive, but because we're willing to be unimpressive when that's what the situation calls for. They've extended the same invitation to any other species that can learn to value authenticity over achievement. Dr. Yelander's voice was thoughtful. And those who refuse? Stella's starlight scales dimmed slightly. They are free to continue as they have. But they will do so without our presence, and without access to those who have chosen a different path. The implications were clear. Galactic civilization was about to split into 2 groups. Those willing to embrace imperfection and authenticity, and those who insisted on maintaining their polished facades. The Drachmarie wouldn't destroy the second group, but they would isolate them completely. Think of it as cosmic natural selection, Sarah added. Species that can adapt to honesty will thrive in this new arrangement. Those that can't, well, they'll get exactly what they've always said they wanted, the chance to be perfect all by themselves. Ambassador Zethkar processed this for a long moment. Captain Shun, I must ask, how did you know? How did you know that terrible food and honest conversation would succeed where our greatest treasures failed? Sarah's smile was rueful. I didn't know. I just knew that everything else had failed, so trying something completely different couldn't make things worse. Sometimes the best strategy is to stop having a strategy and just show up as yourself. She gestured to her companions. These 3 have been looking for someone to have a real conversation with for centuries. They didn't want to be worshipped or feared or impressed. They just wanted to be understood. And maybe that's what we all want, deep down, to be known for who we really are, not who we think we should be. The transmission from the Endeavor continued for another hour as the details of the new arrangement were hammered out. The Drachmarie would establish what they called authenticity stations throughout the galaxy, not military bases, but cultural centers where species could come to engage in the kind of honest self-reflection that would prevent civilizational decay. Participation would be voluntary, but the benefits were significant. Species that embraced the program would gain access to Drachmarie knowledge, protection from genuine external threats, and, most importantly, a network of other civilizations committed to honest interaction. It's like group therapy, Sarah explained, but for entire species, with the occasional shared meal of questionable food. As the emergency session finally drew to a close, Ambassador Zethkar asked one final question. Captain Chen, what happens now? How do we begin this new chapter? Sarah looked around the mess hall, taking in the empty noodle containers and the three ancient beings who had somehow become friends over a terrible lunch. Now, she said, we clean up the dishes and figure out what we're having for dinner. I'm thinking something equally authentic and unpretentious. Maybe grilled cheese sandwiches. Stella here has never experienced processed cheese, and I think it's time we corrected that educational oversight. The three Drachmarie made sounds that could only be interpreted as laughter, and for the first time in 3 years, the galaxy felt like it might actually have a future worth looking forward to. 6 months after what historians would later call the Noodle incident, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The first authenticity station had been established in the neutral zone between Crystalline Confederation space and the Vorthan Collective, a massive structure that looked less like a space station and more like a cosmic coffee shop, complete with mismatched furniture and lighting that was slightly too dim for comfort. Captain Sarah Chun stood at the observation deck of the newly commissioned Earth vessel Honesty, watching as delegates from 17 different species queued up for what had become known as confession sessions with the Drachmarie counselors. The ship's name had been her suggestion, a deliberate choice to embody the new philosophical approach that humanity had accidentally pioneered. Captain, called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communication station, we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony delegation. General Thrax is requesting emergency consultation with our Drachmarie advisors. Sarah suppressed a smile. The transformation of General Thrax from militant skeptic to eager participant in the authenticity program had been one of the more dramatic changes in galactic politics. Put him through to conference room 3. And Rodriguez? Make sure there's plenty of coffee. The terrible kind from the machine that makes that weird grinding noise. The hegemony had been among the first species to embrace the new paradigm, partly because their warrior culture had always valued honesty in combat, and partly because they discovered that acknowledging their flaws made them more effective fighters, not less. It turned out that pretending to be invincible was actually a significant tactical disadvantage. Dr. Yilendra floated through the observation deck, her containment suit now decorated with small stickers that read, "Work in Progress," and "Authentically Confused." The xenopsychologist had become one of the most effective ambassadors in the new system, largely because she'd stopped pretending to understand everything and started admitting when she was completely baffled. Sarah, she called, Stella is asking if you have time for another cultural consultation. Apparently, the Regellian delegation has discovered recreational drugs, and she's not sure how to categorize getting high and watching star formations in terms of civilizational health. Sarah laughed. The Drachmarie's adjustment to their new role as cosmic counselors rather than cosmic destroyers had been an ongoing process. They were still learning to navigate the difference between harmful cultural patterns and simply weird ones. Tell her I'll be right there. And remind her that humans have been getting high and watching clouds for thousands of years, so it's probably fine as long as they're not neglecting their responsibilities. The past 6 months had seen remarkable changes throughout the galaxy. The Crystalline Confederation had established what they called Flaw Festivals, massive cultural events where citizens competed to share their most embarrassing mistakes. The Vorthan Collective had developed a new form of art based entirely on depicting failure in beautiful ways. Even the Trade Federation had restructured their entire economic system around the principle of good enough rather than maximum efficiency. Not every species had embraced the changes. The perfectionist hegemony of Tau Ceti had chosen to isolate themselves completely, constructing a barrier around their territory and refusing all contact with what they called the contaminated zones. Several other species had followed suit, creating what was now known as the pristine sector, a region of space where authenticity was forbidden and everything had to appear flawless at all times. The Drachmae had kept their word about non-interference, allowing these species to maintain their chosen isolation. However, the economic and cultural consequences were becoming apparent. Cut off from the innovation and genuine problem-solving that came from honest interaction, the pristine sector civilizations were beginning to stagnate. Sarah made her way through the corridors of the honesty, noting with satisfaction the various improvements that had been made through Drachmae consultation. The ship now featured what Vorthack called optimal imperfection, systems that worked well enough to be reliable, but retained enough quirks to remind the crew that nothing was ever truly perfect. Conference Room 3 had become something of a legend among galactic diplomatic circles. Unlike the grand chambers where formal negotiations took place, this was deliberately modest. A round table that wobbled slightly, chairs of varying comfort levels, and a coffee machine that had achieved sentience but used its intelligence primarily to judge people's beverage choices. When Sarah entered, she found General Thrax seated across from Zephyr, who cuts the void, with a spread of what appeared to be hegemony field rations between them. Captain Shun, General Thrax rose to greet her, his armored carapace showing new modifications that included comfort padding and decorative elements, changes that would have been considered unmilitary under the old paradigm. Thank you for arranging this session. We have encountered a philosophical dilemma. Zephyr's metallic scales shifted color in what Sarah had learned to recognize as amusement. The general species has discovered that authentic warfare is more effective than performative warfare. However, this has created unexpected consequences. Sarah poured herself a cup of the machine's latest creation, something that tasted vaguely like coffee, but had the consistency of regret. What kind of consequences? General Thrax settled back into his chair, which made its traditional protesting squeak. Our enemies keep surrendering, not because they're defeated, but because they want to join our authenticity program. We've accidentally become the galaxy's most effective recruitment organization. The problem, as it turned out, was one of success. The hegemony military had always been effective, but their new approach of honest self-assessment, genuine tactical analysis, and acknowledgement of limitations had made them nearly unstoppable. More importantly, their willingness to treat defeated enemies as fellow beings rather than conquered territories had created a ripple effect. Last week, General Thrax continued, we responded to a distress call from a civilian transport under attack by pirates. Standard engagement protocols. However, when we arrived, we found ourselves discussing the socioeconomic factors that drive beings to piracy and offering the attackers alternative employment opportunities. Zephyr made a sound that might have been laughter. The pirates requested to fill out application forms. Sarah nearly choked on her terrible coffee. Application forms? For positions in our fleet, General Thrax explained. It seems that honest communication and genuine respect for others is highly attractive to beings who have spent their lives being treated as disposable resources by criminal organizations. We've inadvertently become a rehabilitation program. This was, Sarah reflected, exactly the kind of problem that would never have occurred under the old system. The hegemony had always been focused on defeating their enemies, not understanding them. Now that they'd started treating hostility as a symptom rather than an inherent trait, they were discovering that most of their enemies were really just people who hadn't been given better options. Have you talked to the Drachmae Council about this? Sarah asked. The Drachmae had established what they call the Council, a rotating group of their most experienced members who helped coordinate the authenticity program across different species and regions. Zephyr nodded. Vorthack suggests that this is evidence of civilizational maturity. When a military force becomes so effective that it eliminates the conditions that create enemies, IT has transcended its original purpose. But what do we do with a military that no longer has anyone to fight? General Thrax asked. Our entire cultural identity is built around honorable combat. If combat becomes unnecessary, Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking this was the kind of problem that required a fundamentally different approach, not solving the immediate issue, but reframing the entire question. General, what if combat isn't the goal? What if combat has always been the method, and you just discovered a more effective method for achieving the same goals? She pulled up a holographic display showing various hegemony military actions over the past few months. Look at this pattern. You're not really fighting anymore. You're teaching. You encounter a problem, you analyze it honestly, you address the root causes, and you help everyone involved find a better solution. That's not the end of your military tradition. That's the evolution of it. General Thrax's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You're suggesting that we redefine warfare itself? I'm suggesting you've already redefined it, Sarah replied. The question is whether you want to acknowledge that evolution or fight against it. Zephyr's scales brightened. The captain speaks wisdom. Perhaps the highest form of victory is to win without fighting. And the highest form of strength is to make fighting unnecessary. The conversation continued for another hour, touching on the philosophical implications of post-conflict society and the role of military forces in a galaxy that was rapidly learning to resolve disputes through honesty rather than violence. By the end of the session, General Thrax had begun planning what he called preemptive peacekeeping, military operations designed to address the root causes of conflict before they escalated to violence. As the general left, Sarah found herself alone with Zephyr, who had remained behind to discuss what he called the human anomaly. Captain, he said, his voice carrying undertones of curiosity, we have been observing human society with great interest since our first encounter. Your species presents several paradoxes that we find intriguing. Sarah settled back with another cup of questionable coffee, such as, you are simultaneously the most warlike and most peaceful species we have encountered. Your history is filled with conflict, yet your instinct is to share food with strangers. You create art that celebrates both violence and love, often in the same work. This was a conversation Sarah had been expecting. The Drachmary's psychological analyses of different species had become legendary throughout the galaxy, but their assessment of humanity had been notably delayed. You actively seek out imperfection, Zephyr continued, yet you constantly strive to improve. You acknowledge your flaws while simultaneously working to overcome them. This creates a dynamic tension that we find unprecedented. Sarah smiled. We're walking contradictions. Always have been. I think that's why the instant noodles thing worked. It was perfectly representative of how humans approach everything. We know it's terrible, we do it anyway, and somehow we find a way to make it meaningful. Meaning through imperfection, Zephyr mused. Most species seek meaning through achievement or transcendence. Humans seem to find it through acceptance. Not quite acceptance, Sarah corrected. More like engagement. We don't accept our flaws. We argue with them. We work around them. We make jokes about them. We incorporate them into our art. We don't try to transcend our limitations. We try to dance with them. She gestured around the conference room, with its deliberately imperfect furniture and its judgmental coffee machine. This whole ship is an example. We could have built something sleek and perfect, but instead we built something honest. Every quirk, every flaw, every weird noise it makes tells a story about who we are and how we work. Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, his scales cycling through different metallic hues. The Drachmary have existed for eons, Captain. We have seen species rise to greatness and fall to corruption. We have watched civilizations achieve perfection and die from it. But we have never seen a species that seemed to thrive on imperfection. Maybe that's because we're not thriving in spite of our imperfections, Sarah suggested. Maybe we're thriving because of them. Our flaws force us to be creative, to adapt, to work together, to find humor in dark situations. Take those away, and we'd probably become something much less interesting. The implications of this conversation would later influence Drakmary policy across the galaxy. But in the moment, it was simply two beings trying to understand each other over terrible coffee in a room that was deliberately designed to be imperfect. Over the following hours, Sarah found herself making rounds through the Authenticity Station, checking on various cultural exchange programs and diplomatic initiatives. The Crystalline Confederation had sent a delegation to learn about productive failure from human engineers. The Vorthans were collaborating with Earth artists to develop new forms of imperfect beauty. Even the Trade Federation had established a pilot program for efficient inefficiency. But perhaps the most significant development was happening in what had once been the Drakmary zones of destruction. The ancient beings had begun a massive restoration project, not to rebuild what had been lost, but to create something new from the ashes of the old. It's like cosmic gardening, explained Stella of the Deep Currents when Sarah visited the restoration sites. We cannot undo the destruction we caused, but we can ensure that what grows in its place is more authentic than what came before. The new worlds being established in these regions were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Cities built around the assumption of imperfection, with architecture that celebrated functionality over form. Societies structured to embrace change rather than resist it. Cultures that valued questions more than answers. The irony is not lost on US. Vorthak had admitted during one of their regular dinner meetings. We spent millennia destroying civilizations for losing their authenticity. And now we are building the most authentic civilizations the galaxy has ever seen. Sarah stood at the observation deck of the Honesty as her shift ended, watching the stars and thinking about the strange path that had brought them all to this point. 6 months ago, she'd been the captain of an unremarkable ship carrying unremarkable people on unremarkable missions. Now she was somehow at the center of a galactic transformation that would reshape civilization for centuries to come. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth. It was from her sister, a kindergarten teacher who had always thought Sarah's career in space was slightly ridiculous. "Hey sis," the message began, "saw the news reports about your noodle diplomacy. Mom wants to know if you're eating enough vegetables, and Dad wants to know if you can get him an autograph from one of those dragon things. Also, my kids are asking if they can send crayon drawings to the aliens." Apparently, messy art from 6-year-olds is exactly the kind of authentically imperfect cultural exchange they'd appreciate. "Let me know. Love you." Sarah smiled and began composing her reply. Tomorrow, she would discuss with the Drakmary Council the possibility of establishing the first intergalactic children's art exchange program. She had a feeling that beings who appreciated terrible instant noodles would find finger paintings and stick figures absolutely delightful. The galaxy had spent millions of years trying to achieve perfection, only to discover that what they really needed was to learn how to be gloriously, unapologetically imperfect. And somehow it had taken a species that ate processed food and made jokes about their own failures to show them the way. In the end, that seemed perfectly appropriate. After all, the best solutions were often the ones no one saw coming, especially when they arrived in a styrofoam cup with artificial flavoring and a side of honest conversation. The universe, Sarah reflected as she watched ships from dozens of species converging on the Authenticity Station, had finally learned how to have a sense of humor about itself. And that perhaps was the most human thing of all.